Hey everyone, it's Cody with After 5 Outdoors, and today I'm with Conservation Officer Johnson from the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources out of the Warroad Station, and your primary area is Lake of the Woods. We're going to go over the rules and regulations for 2021 on the Minnesota side of Lake of the Woods. So can you kind of tell us what is the primary function of a conservation officer out on Lake of the Woods? What's your main goal?
Sure. First, thanks for having me again. Big fan of the channel.
Absolutely.
So appreciate the opportunity to kind of get the word out there of what, the things that we see most frequently for violations out on the ice, what you can do, what you can't do. Basically, we have two primary objectives anytime that we're out on the ice, and that is safety. That's our number one primary objective. Not only our safety, but of course the public safety. We want to make sure that every person that's out on the ice gets home safely and gets back to their family safely. With safety, of course, we get into the alcohol realm too. Everybody loves to get away from work for a little bit, have a couple of drinks while they're out ice fishing. Great, but we always encourage people to drink responsibly, consume alcohol responsibly, and to make sure that you have a safe and sober means to get back off of the ice. So if you are caught for DWI on a snowmobile, ATV, it is treated the same as if you were caught in a truck or a car out on public roads. Mm-hmm. So it will not only revoke your driver's license, but it will also revoke your privileges for ATV and snowmobile as well.
Right. And that's going back to the ice safety thing a little bit. Especially when you get on the northern end of Lake of the Woods, when you get up towards the northwest angle, Garden Island, mm-hmm. Flag Island Flats. There's a lot of bad ice areas up there, and you need to be aware. You need to plan where you're going, and it's, if you can help it, don't travel after dark too, especially like right now when we're in early ice stage.
Correct. So it's obviously most dangerous right now, and then when we get towards the spring.
Right.
But even in the dead of winter, when we have 30 plus inches of ice out there, heaves form, cracks separate. I mean, you were just telling me that you were out
Right.
ice fishing on your own and a crack formed right underneath your feet. It
Right.
can happen in a hurry.
Mm-hmm.
So those two sheets of ice can separate and create open water quickly. So you might have 30 inches on one side and 30 inches on the other side, but there can be open water or just an inch or two frozen over in between them. So always be cognizant of where you are and the fact that that ice can give away at any given time. Our second objective is to make sure that people are out and they're doing things legally. And that's where we come into this video to kind of clear up some of those gray areas and make it a little bit more black and white as to what you can and can't do. Just know that if you're watching this video, it doesn't exactly cover everything. There's no replacement for picking up one of the synopsises at any gas station, any place that sells licenses basically, and really taking a deep dive into it to know exactly what you can and can't do. But this video will at least help kind of clarify some of the things in here that still may be a little bit gray.
Okay, so when you're out patrolling, you're out working the ice, what are the most common violations that you are seeing out there?
So the most common violations that we're coming across usually have to do with slot size and limits for individual species, and then some more miscellaneous violations. So that's going to be your extra lines, fishing with too many lines, or not having shelter tag on your shelter. And we'll kind of get into when you need those, when you don't need those. But starting off with slot size. Lake of the Woods is a special regulations lake, which means, of course, that it has some different regulations on it that might not necessarily apply to lakes inland or other lakes that you might visit across the state. So one of those regulations is slot sizes. Slot sizes are subject to two different species on Lake of the Woods, and that is walleye and then northern pike. So for walleye, the slot size is going to be 19.5 inches to 28 inches. Now that is an inclusive protected slot. Means that is a protected slot that if you have a fish from 19.5 inches up to 28 inches, it has to be immediately released back into the water. Inclusive slot, meaning that a 19.5 inch fish is part of a slot fish. So if you get that fish that's right on 19.5 inches, you're going to be tempted to keep it, but it does have to go back in the water. And same with 28. If you get that one that's right on 28, it has to go back in the water. So it either has to be one over 28 inches or under 19.5 inches. The slot size actually only affects walleye and northern. So if you get the 21-inch, sauger that's out there,
Right.
they do exist.
Right.
They're few and far between, but they are out there. You can keep it. It is only affecting walleye and northern pike. So the northern pike slot then is 30 to 40 inches. Same thing, 30 inches has to go back in the water, and then all the way up to 40. You can have 1 over 40. So total number of fish, we'll get into kind of possession limits. The main two targeted species that people are going after on Lake of the Woods are walleye and sauger, and then your northern pike too. So walleye sauger, you can have an aggregate possession of 6, no more than 4 of which can be walleye. Northern pike is 3. You can have a total of 3 northern pike, but only one of them can be over 40 inches.
Okay. So let's say we're fishing, and it happens. You catch a big walleye, and it's like it's taken that jig and wrap, or it's taken that buckshot rattle, or whatever, all the way down, and that fish does not survive. What do you do?
Yeah, we can't control, obviously, how a fish takes a lure or bait. Sometimes they're really aggressive, and it's going to be down in its lower intestine before you even have a chance to set the hook. So in that case, if you get that 26-inch slot walleye, and you get it through the ice, and there's no chance of actually being able to release it back into the water live, just give us a call anytime. Let us know what happened. Mistakes happen. Sometimes they're even beyond our control, and we understand that. Just give us a call. We'll come out. We'll chit-chat about what happened. We can't let you keep the fish, but at the same time, you won't be getting a ticket. So the last thing that you want is to say, well, that one's not going back live. I'm just going to keep it anyway. And now we come across, and you try and explain that, well, I was going to call.
Yeah.
At that point, it's going to be a little too late.
Yeah.
So just make sure, first thing you do, give us a shout, let us know. We'll come out, we'll meet you, and we'll take care of things. And at least in that case, you're not going to get a ticket, but you just won't be able to keep the fish.
What is the limit on perch on Lake of the Woods?
So perch on Lake of the Woods would be the same as any other body of water in Minnesota. It's going to be your 20 daily limit, and then your 40 possession limit. Perch is one of those few species that has a different daily and possession limit. So for walleye and sauger, it's 6 daily, which is also 6 in possession. Perch, you can have 20 per day and no more than 40 overall. So you can go out and you can catch 20 the first day and 20 the second day, and there's your 40. You just can't be over 40 for your aggregate possession. One of the other things that we get asked frequently out on the ice is there's some confusion between possession limit and daily limit. So for walleye and sauger, it's the same thing. It's 6 for daily, 6 for possession. It basically means that you can at no time possess more than 6 walleye sauger. So we run into some people who are confused a little bit. They think they can catch 6 walleye sauger on Friday, another 6 on Saturday, and pretty soon they're going home with 18. You can't have more than the 6 at any given time. So the things that we run across are, sometimes accidental and sometimes not so accidental. They might be intentional. They want to go home with more fish than they actually can. So we want to really reiterate the fact that the possession limit is 6 at any given time. You can't go over that. The other thing that we kind of run across too is people will, quote, eat down to their limit. So they might go out and catch 8 fish, but they intend to eat 2 later that night. Well, you're still at 8, so you'd be 2 over your limit. If you intend to eat your fish, great. You just can't possess more than 6. Have your fish fry, back at the cabin, do whatever you got to do, and then you can go out the next day and replenish your limit back to 6.
Right. So one of the big questions that a few of the resorts that I'm working with has asked me to get a good clarification on, if you are on a sleeper house and you want to eat some fillets that night, how do you legally do that?
Yeah, great question, Cody. Thank you for asking. It's something that we definitely see some confusion on. So it's one of those things that is great to be able to kind of get out to the public and remove some of that gray area and make it a little bit more black and white. So you can have a shore lunch while you're out on the ice. So you are out on a special regulations lake, which means that it is illegal to possess any fillets out on the ice. The reason being that we have to always be able to measure and count and identify each fish that's out there because it's a special regulations lake. So there's that slot size that we talked about for walleye. If those fillets are off the walleye, it's really hard for me to tell whether that's a legal 19-inch fish or whether it was an illegal 21-inch fish. So that's why you can't possess any fillets out on the ice. But how do I have a shore lunch without taking fillets off the fish? You can do it legally. You just have to be in the process of cooking. So I'll use an example. Say I go out fishing by myself, do some jigging, and I get my 6 fish. I've got 4 walleye and 2 sauger. And I'm getting a little hungry, so I want to have a little shore lunch. I brought out some utensils to cook them up with. I would start preparing my oil, get the oil hot, and once I'm doing that, now I'm in the act of cooking. Now I'm in the act of preparing the food. So that's when I can go knife to fish and take the fillets off and start cooking them. You need to maintain control of the carcasses so they can still be measured and counted. They will count towards your daily limit for that particular day. So I've caught my 6 fish, and even though I've eaten 2 of them, I'm still at 6 fish. The next day I can start fishing and I can replenish those 2 fish back towards my limit. So
Okay.
whatever I've consumed, I'll be able to replenish, but not until the next day.
All right, so you're out fishing, you catch your limit, and you want to go home. How do you legally transport those fish?
So the big thing is to obviously have the fish in an identifiable fashion. Minnesota requires you to transport fish with the 1-inch patch of skin. One thing that we run into on Lake of the Woods is there are saugers in Lake of the Woods. If you only have the 1-inch patch of skin on saugers that you're bringing home, they will count as a walleye. So that's something that we really want to touch on, because if you have your 4 walleye and 2 saugers, but all of them are dressed the same and only have that 1-inch patch of skin for identification, the state is going to see it as you are in possession of 6 walleye, which would be over limit. So the correct way to transport saugers is to keep them in an identifiable fashion, which is head, tail, and the dorsal fin.
So on Lake of the Woods, is there any prohibited bait?
There's not so much a prohibited bait, necessarily something that you can't use on Lake of the Woods, but what people do run into, well, especially they're out northern fishing, is bait belonging to the herring family. So what we see, especially for northern fishermen who are using tip-ups, they like to use bait that belongs to the herring family. That would be your Cisco, your smelt, your Tulabee. Any bait that belongs to the herring family is susceptible to what's called VHS. VHS is a fish fungus that thankfully we don't have in Lake of the Woods, and we want to keep it that way. So all bait belonging to that herring family, if you're using smelt, Cisco, etc., it needs to be certified as VHS free. Now fortunately that's nothing that falls on the fishermen, except for it just has to have a label that says VHS free from wherever you purchased it. 95% of the bait stores, if you buy that particular bait, it's going to have the label on the packaging that says VHS free, VHS certified. You need that label, and you need to maintain control of that label and possession of that label while you're using that bait out on the ice. Now if you're just using suckers or obviously hot dogs or something like that, you don't need that. But any bait that would belong to that herring family, you need to make sure that you have that label on the packaging that says VHS free. So if you get it from a bait store, 9 times out of 10, it's going to have that label. You'll be all right. Where we run into issues is people who buy it from like a grocery store or a fish market. You can get it obviously at bulk. You can get it probably at a better price if you're getting smelt than you can at a bait store, but it's probably not going to be VHS tested and VHS certified. So we want to make sure that we're not putting any of that bait down into our fishery and exposing fish to bait that could potentially have that fungus.
All right, is there any rules and regulations that go along with hooks?
Yeah, good question. So hooks are going to be treated just the same on Lake of the Woods as any other lake in Minnesota. So any type of lure just can't have more than 3 total hooks. And hooks are identified both the same as multiple hooks, which are your treble hooks, or a single hook. So even though a treble hook might have 3 individual prongs on it, it still just counts as 1 hook. So you just have to make sure that no lure has more than 3 hooks, and that there's no more than 9 inches of separation between the furthest hooks on that lure. So another common violation that we run across would be people using too many lines. Anywhere in Minnesota, including Lake of the Woods, you can only use 2 lines through the ice. So that includes your tip-up lines, that includes any lines that you would have down through the ice. You can just have no more than 2. So it gets tempting, it's a slow fishing day, you want to get your limit. It gets really tempting real quick to drop that 3rd or even 4th line down. You can just have no more than 2. So the other half of that is people get tempted to leave their lines, and we need to make sure that we're always tending our lines. So the definition of tending your lines is to be within sight of those lines. So if you're inside your house, you just have to be within sight of both of your lines. Now say you have tip-ups out. Tip-ups are a little bit different. Tip-ups, you just have to be within 200 feet of those tip-ups. Just keep in mind that whether you have 1 tip-up out and 1 line in the house, 2 lines in the house, or 2 tip-ups out, you just can't go over those 2 lines.
Okay, can you kind of give us a little insight on what needs to be licensed as far as a shelter for ice fishing on Lake of the Woods?
Yeah, great question. It's something that we run across frequently. It's something that we saw a lot last year because it is fairly new, but it's been on the books for a couple of years now. Portable houses do not require a shelter license as long as they're occupied. Now the gray area and kind of some of the confusion comes with what is a portable house. Minnesota defines a portable house as something that's collapsible and can fold in on itself and is able to be disassembled for transportation. So that would be your clam houses, your little pop-ups. Wheel houses do not count as portable. Yes, they have wheels and you can transport them,
right,
but they're not seen as portable. So anytime you have a wheel house or something with fixed sides that's not just a small clam shelter or a pop-up, it requires a shelter tag at all times. Whether you're occupying it or not occupying it, anytime that's out on the ice, it requires a shelter tag. They're $15 extra. They have to be displayed on the outside of the house, or at least just be in view from the outside of the house. So whether that's in a window, taped to the exterior, whatever you want to do, as long as we can see the shelter tag from the outside, they're required at all times.
So on your non-portable house, is there any markings that you have to put on it?
Great question. Yes. So you have to have your permanent houses marked at all times with some sort of identification. Now you can do it one of 3 different ways. The most common one that we see is people will put their 9-digit DNR number. It's just the 9 digits that's on top of any fishing license, hunting license that you've ever purchased. It's the same number that's assigned to you just like your driver's license number. We see that most frequently. All non-portable houses are required to have that at all times on the exterior of their house. So it can either be your 9-digit DNR number, your driver's license number, or your name and your address. The one we see most frequently is just the 9-digit DNR number.
And we're talking about fish houses too. Is there any date, is the date earlier or later on Lake of the Woods than it is on the inland waters?
Yeah, thanks for asking. So obviously we're in the early portions of the fish season. So ice shelter removal isn't exactly on the forefront of our minds right now, nor should it be. But keep in mind that when we start getting towards that springtime and the ice does start thawing, that there is an ice removal date just like there is any other lake. Minnesota has different dates assigned based on where you are in the state. Lake of the Woods being a Minnesota-Canada boundary lake, the removal date is March 31st. So basically on midnight on the morning of April 1st, all shelters have to be removed from the ice. You can still go out and fish from a shelter, but it has to come off with you every time you leave the ice.
Okay, so one of the questions that we had in the comment was pertaining to children. If you are going up to the lake and you have your 8-year-old daughter with you, do they need a license?
No, if you have your 8-year-old daughter, then they wouldn't need a license. In Minnesota, you're not required to have a license until you're 16. 16 to 89 years of age, you have to have a fishing license. Otherwise, it's not required. So any children that you have with you, if they're under 16, they can possess their own limit while out on the ice as well, in addition to your own limit under your fishing license. The only exception is for non-residents. So if you do come from Wisconsin, North Dakota, wherever it may be, unless you have a family fishing license, any fish that the child would catch will count towards the parent license for the individual. So if you come from North Dakota or Wisconsin and you want to be able to keep your children's fish as well and have them allowed to keep their own possession, then you would need to either buy a family license or the child would need a youth license.
So in last year's video, we talked about one of the problems and the issues on Lake of the Woods is people leaving garbage on the ice, trash, parts of their fish houses, whatnot. Is that still occurring up there?
I think it's probably a problem on any body of water that you might go across, but it definitely is a problem on Lake of the Woods. We want to make sure that anything that we're bringing out onto the ice is coming back off the ice with us. So we see it all too often where we'll pull up to a site where there was a wheelhouse or there was a couple of shelters and there's bags of garbage, there's pieces of lumber or wood from using for footings for your house and shelter. We want to make sure that none of that is left on the ice. Anything that's left out on the ice, needless to say, once that ice thaws out, it's going to sink to the bottom. It's going to be exposed to that fishery. So we want to avoid that at all costs, just like you would on your own private property. Ultimately, the lake is public property. It belongs to all of us. Anything that's left out there is obviously going to be considered litter, and you could find yourself fined for it.
So I guess in closing, just kind of want to pick your brain a little bit. What are some of the things that you just kind of want to reiterate to people when they're going up to Lake of the Woods, or anywhere fishing for that matter? Is there anything you want to throw across to them? And we just want to get your opinion a little bit, since you work Lake of the Woods primarily. What are you seeing of the fishery? Is it looking pretty good? Because I know last year we had a lot of pressure. We had a lot of people. A lot of the other lakes were not fishable due to ice conditions and stuff, and everybody flocked to Lake of the Woods. Is it still looking pretty good up there?
Yeah, so I'll touch on the things that we kind of really want to reiterate first. Number one is that ice safety factor. I can't stress enough that no ice is safe ice. So although you might be seeing things on Facebook and people say, yep, good to go, come on up, just keep in mind that ultimately it falls back on you to make sure that wherever you're going out on the ice is in fact safe to travel across, despite what Facebook might say, despite what some of the fishing channels might say. You need to always make sure for yourself that you're crossing safe ice before you just go out and venture out away from some of the more populated areas. So ice safety, number one, first and foremost. Two, make sure that whenever you fish any body of water, what specific rules apply to that body of water. So when you come up to Lake of the Woods, make sure you know exactly what you can do and what you can't do, and that all starts right here. Take the 10 minutes to read through this and know exactly what you can and can't be doing. As far as the fishery goes, despite all the pressure that we saw last year, which was a miraculous amount of pressure, we saw a lot of houses out on the ice last year and more hours of pressure than I think had been logged in a long time out on Lake of the Woods. The fishery still seems pretty good. I read the fishery report that just came out a couple of weeks ago, and you can too by accessing it through the Minnesota DNR website, through our fisheries. It was a pretty strong report. A lot of Sauger numbers were taken last year as opposed to walleye, so we saw a lot more Sauger being taken. So far it's still very early in the season, but we're seeing a lot of fish caught. A lot of the fish that we're seeing caught belong to a smaller class size, and we always encourage people, I know you want to get your fish, but if it's that 9-10 inch fish,
right,
maybe there might be something a little bit better down there. Put it back in there, let it grow up,
right,
and take something else instead.